yes environment. So over to you, Wendy, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah. So again, I'll just reiterate for everybody who's on the webinar, please feel free to ask questions as I go along. The presentation really is fairly informal. I want to be able to provide you with information that you've come to the webinar hoping to find. So please stop me, let Sarah know, and I'm happy to take questions throughout and also at the end. And also my contact information is on the last slide of the PowerPoint, and please feel free in the future to contact me if there's anything that I can do to assist you or that you have other questions. Because I think this is something, mental health awareness, I often talk about as a life skill that everyone requires. And I think that together, collectively, if we have a basis of information and understanding, we can do so much to support people who have challenges off and on through their life with mental illness. So contact me if you have questions. If I don't have the answers, I do have great connections with colleagues, and I will certainly try to find the answers or help you find resources to support the work that you're doing, which I know you know, but is incredibly important. So yeah, I'll start now. I think we skipped a slide. Just let me go back. Oops. I'll just go to slide 2. Yeah. Okay, so I've just put up some things that might make you wonder if somebody has a mental illness. You may already know with some of the individuals that you work with, some of your clients, that they do have, but some of the things you might think about in terms of thoughts and perceptions. So I've just put up there. People may have some kind of confused thinking. You just can't really sort of understand exactly what they're trying to communicate. Grandiose ideas, strange ideas. There may be something there in terms of sometimes it might be indicative that someone has a bipolar illness. Certainly people who have what we call delusions. I'll talk a little bit more about those down the line, but those are false fixed beliefs that can't be reasoned away. So the person believes something that we can pretty well be sure is not true, and they can't sort of, nothing that you say or explain to them will change that. Of course, people who have suicidal thoughts, about 90% of people who have suicidal thoughts do have a mental illness. So that's certainly something we need to be aware of, and suicide is really quite a common problem that we need to address. It's really a public health issue. And people who have difficulty concentrating, making decisions, remembering things, if you have a challenge with a mental illness, it impacts the way you process. So this can have difficulties in each of these areas. And then hallucinations, which also would tell us that someone's not in touch with reality. So hallucinations are distortions of any one of the 5 senses. So we often think of them as auditory or visual, but really they can be gustatory, so something that someone tastes, touches. It can be any one of them. If you look at feelings, prolonged depression. So somebody who's incredibly sad over a long period of time, they have sort of helpless, overwhelmed feelings. You see people who may have highs and lows in terms of emotion. Again, maybe thinking of somebody who might have a bipolar illness. Excessive worries, fears, where any of these we can have off and on, all of us. These are feelings that we all can share. The difference is if the feelings or behaviors or thoughts go on for a period of time and impact our ability to live our life. So they impact our ability to go to school, to be with our families, and it has a serious impact on our overall quality of life. Then we would be looking at the possibility that someone has a diagnosable mental illness. And anger, blaming others. It's often easier to put the blame externally, and certainly with the stigma associated with mental illness, people feel that if they admit to certain things or people think that it's related to a mental illness, they may be viewed differently. And again, suspiciousness. It may be indicative of somebody who might have a disorder like schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. Inability to cope with daily challenges and activities. So there it is. It's something that is extreme, impacts our life. Because as I said, all of the things I'm talking about, each of us can relate to, and at some point in our life, we've probably had these emotions. Agitation, frustration, anxiety, people who have excessive fatigue, lack of energy, again, could be associated with something like depression. Rapid pressured speech, again, people with bipolar disorder who may be in a hypomanic state may demonstrate this behavior. Changes in eating, sleeping patterns, so people sleeping more, sleeping less, eating more, eating less. Often when we have mental health challenge, it impacts all aspects. And these might be a first sign that there's something wrong, something impacting. People who are easily distracted, so that inability to concentrate and then stimuli in the environment catch their attention and they have a hard time staying focused on the task at hand or the person that's engaging with them. The unexplained physical ailments, it's easier to talk about physical ailments you have than it is to talk about perhaps emotional challenges. So this is sometimes where people will focus more on physical, but there are underlying psychological challenges that they're experiencing. And social withdrawal. People with a mental illness are very aware often of the stigma associated with that, and so sometimes they stay away from other individuals and withdraw so that people do not become aware of the challenges they're having. Self-harming behaviors, I'll talk a little bit later on, but people may be engaging in self-harm in a way of coping with some of the challenges that they're experiencing. People engage in risk-taking or impaired judgment. Could be indicative, somebody who's using some kind of substance, has a substance use disorder. Again, people with bipolar disorder in a hypomanic phase may lose some of their ability to make good judgments. Certainly substance use is key. Many mental health challenges go hand in hand with substance use. The reason, makes sense. People are trying to medicate themselves. They're trying to just get through a difficult period in their life. They have no intentions of developing another disorder. They don't wake up in the morning and think, I'll start drinking and, then I'm going to have a problem with alcohol. It's always intended as a temporary way of coping and helping themselves get through a difficult period. But the challenge is it often then becomes a problem in itself. And denial. It's a common defense mechanism for most of us, so certainly with someone with a mental illness, it's often something that they will resort to deny that there's anything really wrong. So I'm going to talk now just about some of the strategies. I'm sure many of them you probably already know, but how we could create a caring learning environment. I think it's just important, I'm sure you're all well aware of stigma, to just remember that it is the number one reason people don't seek help, that it continues to be alive and well in terms of fueled by the media and by myths, people that don't understand mental illness. And the really sad part for me is when we see individuals internalize the stigma. So there I refer to when you have somebody who says, Wendy, I'm a schizophrenic. And they begin to label themselves as the illness. And I'm always really quick to stop someone at that point and say, no, you're not. You're Mary. You're someone's sister. You're a spouse. And you are challenged with schizophrenia. But I think we have to work really hard that we don't see people who now view themselves as the illness because that's what they've heard from other people for so long. So I think it's important in a classroom where you have, on post-secondary campuses, wherever you're working with individuals, that we do some talking about mental health, mental illness, and we work together to minimize stigma. So it's about educating each other about the facts versus the myths or the fiction. I think it's important to talk about mental illness. I think it should become part of our everyday conversations in some ways because it's that prevalent and it's something that we can all make a difference if we understand. I think it's important to challenge people's biases. So we all come with certain beliefs from our experiences, and I think it's important that people be able to talk about fears and thoughts related to mental illness so that we're able to then clarify and give people the appropriate information. Not labeling. I think often people don't label individuals intending to be malicious, but I do hear, even on the media, it makes me cringe. I will still hear someone on the TV, on the news say the person's schizophrenic. And it's so important, as I said, that we don't label people as illnesses. We don't call people the cancer. So why do we call people who have a mental illness by the illness itself? And then just watching our language. I mean, we all use certain phrases very freely, and I just always encourage people to be more aware of how we use terms like crazy, nuts, because for someone or a family who has an individual they love challenged with mental illness, some of these words can actually have a pretty negative impact for them. So challenge family, friends, peers, who perpetuate stigma, help to educate. I think we should do more with the media. I think we should be responding to articles in the paper and things we hear to help continue to educate the media around how not to perpetuate the myths and the stereotypes. I think we need to be supportive of each other because on any given day, it's a continuum and we may be challenged ourselves. And I think it's really courageous when people can share their personal stories because it helps to normalize mental illness. And I don't think there's probably a Canadian who doesn't know someone with a mental illness. Of course, the statistics, 1 in 5 of us will have a diagnosed mental illness in our lifetime. And that's not the people necessarily that we just work with. That's us on this webinar. We are the face of mental illness as well. And I think it's important when people feel able to share some of their stories about themselves, perhaps, their family, because it does help normalize it. And I love this quote, mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of, but stigma and bias shame us all. And so that's still an issue. We're getting better, but there is still a lot of stigma there. So I talk quite a bit about resilience. I really believe that we live in a society where we now are looking for quick fixes to the challenges that we have. And some of the younger generation are very used to adults stepping in and problem solving for them. And we may be well-meaning, but what ends up happening is we don't enable young people to develop a sense of their own resilience and ability to problem solve. So they look externally for issues and challenges they have. They believe somebody else has to come in and rescue them or fix it. So I think it's really important to get to know our students, spend time one-on-one with them, to know them as a person, some of the challenges they may have. Of course, this differs depending on the size of your classroom, but as much as you can to know about the people that you're working with. And observe that once you get to know people, then you will see challenges. You will see precipitating factors, perhaps triggers. You may start to learn about patterns of how they think and feel and behave, and then you'll be able to partner with them to see how you can support them. So I talk about also, warning signs of relapse. If you get to know people and they have some awareness of their illness and the challenges, they can often share with you the things that they know are going on that might bring to their attention that they're having, additional challenges. So it's really good to try to become aware of some of that. And of course, everybody's unique and individual, and I think we need to look at every person in that way and not by any label that they may have. Focusing on strengths and abilities, to me, is key. Too often we focus on people's challenges, their problems, their negative behaviors, and again, people internalize this. If we focus more on their strengths and we stretch ourselves to look at the person and what do they bring that is a strength. No matter how many challenges they have, people have strengths. And I think it's important that we identify those and help people see their strengths and abilities. And encouraging students to get to know each other in the classroom. I often talk about, I believe we are our brother's keeper, that we have come to a point where we don't know each other, we don't know our neighbors, we don't have the community collectiveness that we used to have. And then in terms of mental illness, this needs to change, and we need to feel some responsibility for people in our groups, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, to help where we can. And I often say, you don't have to be a psychiatrist, you don't have to be a psychologist to help someone with a mental health challenge. You just need to be able to use your words. And I ask people to think about it in terms of CPR. Many of us know CPR. We're not cardiologists, we're not physicians, and yet we will perform CPR and compress somebody's heart between their breastbone and their spine. And we also have defibrillators in all kinds of public places where people, individual lay people, can pull them off the wall, put stickies on people's chests, and actually send an electrical current to the person's heart. So when we have that aspect and abilities, I say to people, surely you have ability to use your words. So that's where, within the classroom, I think it's important to foster that sense of collective support.
Wendy, we have a question or a comment from Robert. Robert,
Sure.
I have enabled your microphone. If you click the microphone icon to the left of your name, we should be able to hear you speak.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say that one thing that we've done that successfully had the students, like in a sense, get to know each other and become more involved in the community type environment is regular presentations, like the whole class doing presentations.
Yep.
And it's also helpful because there's a couple of milestones for any LBS instructors that can, you can get a couple of milestones out of the way from that as well, with computers and with presenting in front of people.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I think all of those strategies, and probably each of you out there has strategies you can share among yourselves, and of course I'm sure you do, but I encourage people, to do that as well, because you may find some things that work in your classroom that somebody else might not have thought of and can use. But that sounds really a great strategy. Cooperation rather than competition. So I think for educators, it's really important that we create a sense of cooperation and not competition. I feel really strongly in education, and it may be less so with the population you work for, but certainly in post-secondary campuses where I work, I feel that we drive a lot of competition unknowingly through students by focusing on marks. They become so focused on marks, I see incredible anxiety. And the learning somehow gets lost, and it's all marks driven. I often say to people, but did you learn something through the assignment? Although you didn't get the A you were expecting, did you learn something? And I think we have to change our thinking, because I do think it's educators who drive this. I often talk about setting high expectations so that we expect the best of people because they will rise to the occasion. Sometimes when we look and we think, oh, maybe these individuals I'm working with, and we see them in a certain light and only believe they're capable of rising to a certain level, then they don't even meet that expectation. But in my experience, you set the bar high, you convey a belief in people's abilities, you may not, and he will rise to the occasion because somebody believes in them. And I think that's incredibly important. So, encouraging people to take risks, to try new things, and celebrating effort and willingness to try. So, maybe you don't succeed the first time, but you've tried and you did something different, and I think that's something to celebrate.
Wendy, we had a comment from Joe, who is, I guess, affirming one of your earlier recommendations to share stories. Joe has written that she thinks that letting students know if you yourself have mental health challenges is important. And Joe, I don't know if you have any further comments. I've given you access to your microphone if you'd like to speak. Not hearing anything, Joe. If you click the microphone icon to the left of your name and you'd like to speak, you can. If you don't have anything further to add, thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I would, totally agree that's, that's incredibly important. Next slide. So I put here, honor mistakes is an important part of the learning process. Again, from my experience over the years, I find that we don't necessarily do this well. Students are incredibly fearful of making mistakes, being singled out. And so I think, again, how many of us haven't made mistakes in our lives? And I often say we've learned more from failures in our lives than we ever learn from our successes. But students don't often want to even hear the word failure. When I mention it in any of my classrooms, most of the students will say, oh, that's not possible for me. And then I say, let's talk about that and what really is the worry. A failure doesn't define you. You learn from it, and you pick yourself up and you go on, and it does build resilience. And I tell them on our campus, there isn't a professor on campus, I don't care what their credential is, who hasn't failed at something in their life. And they may not be talking about it, but it's happened, and they're still incredibly successful people. And I think we have to help students see that. I think early on in the school system, somehow there's a message communicated that failure is not an option, that failure means you're either not smart or you're unmotivated. And I think we really have to work very hard to change that perspective. So helping people work through adversity and develop coping mechanisms. So a concept, an assignment, something is challenging, but they're capable. And I think if we drive that message, then people will continue to work and strive to get through it and to manage, and then at the end have incredible satisfaction when they look back to see that something they found very difficult and scary or didn't think they could do, in the end they could. So I talk about believing in yourself. And we need to believe in people who have challenges that they can succeed, and we need to generate within them this idea that we don't know what's going to happen from day to day, and not every day will be a great day, but one thing that people can tap into is a belief in themselves. If they work hard and they continue to move forward, things will unfold well in the end. And along the way, there may be little blips, but that's okay. As I said, you pick yourself up, you learn from it, and you move on. So we need to create this hope and belief in people's abilities to be resilient and succeed.
There's a lovely comment that Tiffany put into the text chat. Wendy, show me a person who has never made a mistake, and I'll show you a person who has never achieved much, from Joan Collins.
Yes, that's excellent, Tiffany, and that's the kinds of things I think we need to talk more about, because in the environment I work in, that's not discussed a lot. As I said, failure and mistakes are not something that's necessarily talked about in a positive way. So I agree wholeheartedly. That's a wonderful quote. Thanks for sharing that. So we'll just talk a little bit about some of the communication strategies. There are many of them you probably are already aware. So listening to the whole message, right? Not just the words. So you give a person the chance to really communicate in full by actively listening. I look a lot at people's nonverbal, their eye contact, their body language, because nonverbally people often communicate far more than they do with their words. And certainly nonverbal communication is often more accurate than what someone is telling you with their words. I think it's important to give people your full attention, so demonstrate your listening. Provide feedback, so reflect, clarify what they've said, summarize, and reserve your judgment, because we all judge very well. I say we sort of are judging individuals from the time we wake up in the morning till the time we go to bed, and we need to reserve that judgment and hear the person tell their whole story before. If we don't, we actually don't hear the entire message, and we can miss something that's incredibly important. So there's some quotes I enjoy, right? Nature gave us 2 ears and only 1 tongue, so listen twice as much as you talk. And the heart of a fool is in his mouth, but the mouth of a wise man is in his heart. And I think there's a lot to be said for both of those quotes. So here's the lead communication strategy, I believe, besides actively listening is being able to respond with empathy. So I often talk about lead with your E. So empathy means our ability to walk in somebody else's shoes, right? How they might feel, responding to the feelings. We often in communication respond to the content and the words, but we rarely respond to how the person is feeling, and the communication may be overt or covert. And then we're only responding in half. So things like, sounds like you're feeling really angry, or it must be really frightening to think that you might not pass this course. I understand you're feeling very angry about the mark you got and the effort you put forth. So conveying the feeling, and that's even in positive and negative. So, somebody's really super excited and they're talking about, I just got a new car. And people say, oh, you got a new car, Wendy. They're responding to the content. What is really key to giving a good response is to respond to the emotions. So saying, I can hear the excitement in your voice, Wendy, around the new car that you've purchased. And then they've connected with the feeling tone. So that is always, to me, incredibly important to include in all of our responses, and it's not something people do all that often. So I call it leading with your E. So connecting with the person, right? Important to know mental illness is no different than a physical illness, but we have this tremendous stigma that says it is. Be honest, be caring in your approach with people. I think honesty is absolutely key. People have to trust us, have to believe that we want to partner with them, that we want to support them, that we want them to help them be successful in whatever it is that they are deciding on. We want to see that people feel comfortable with us. So we do that by leading with our E, by being good listeners. I think it's also important to emphasize safety for everyone, that we create a culture and an environment in the classroom of safety, that people respect each other in the classroom, and that we don't have anyone feeling vulnerable, so that people can share and say, people can afford to make mistakes. So it's important, I think, as educators, that we create that culture in our classroom. And of course, privacy and confidentiality, where that really applies, that we be very cognizant that we don't share things that we shouldn't, based on confidentiality principles. Mindful of personal space, I think that's probably just common sense, but some people are uncomfortable when you step in too close into their personal space. I always stay in someone's visual field when I'm working with someone. Very important that they can see where I am. Minimizing distractions, especially if I'm working one-on-one with someone. If I want them to try to focus on me and they may have some challenges going on for themselves, then I want to minimize distractions around. I often begin conversations with people by sharing my concerns or observations. So if I see something happening with them, I might say, I noticed that you appear very anxious, you're wringing your hands, you're shuffling your feet, and that opens the door for me to let them know that I have some concerns. And expressing to them the importance of putting their feelings into words. Some people have a lot of difficulty in talking about how they feel, and I think we can encourage people to do that. Actively listening, of course, I've said that's incredibly important, right? Most of us don't even actively listen in our homes and in our private lives. How many of us are multitasking and our spouse or our children are talking to us and we're going, and then someone challenges us and says, you're not listening, what did I say? And we go, oh my goodness, and we can't say what we heard because we weren't actually listening. So to me, active listening is an incredible gift that we give people. And if you've ever been in the presence of someone who's a really good listener, you identify that and you know that, and you like to be around people who are really good listeners. There's the lead with the E, and then don't label, diagnose. And it doesn't really matter what the person's diagnosis is. It matters about their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how we can support them. And I often just encourage people not to ask a lot about explanations for behavior, because it's something we often don't know. And most of you probably can relate to if your spouses or someone has ever asked you why. Or you ask your children, why did you do that? Their response is, I don't know, I just did it, right? So I often, if I'm interested in what's led up to, I might say, help me understand what happened prior to the frustrations you're demonstrating now. So then the person can just begin to talk, but I'm not asking them, why are you so frustrated? Because that might be really hard for them to give a response, and they might feel quite defensive. And continuing to emphasize we're here to support, we're here to help. I like to empower people by asking them what they think will help, by encouraging them to talk to me about what might have helped them before in circumstances, what strategies they've used to help them manage challenges they've had. Sometimes they don't think they have any strategies, and I think you have to engage in the conversation beyond, well, I don't really have any, Wendy, and say, well, you know, you're here today, let's talk about some of the things that might have worked, and asking them how I can help, rather than me presuming. I have ideas of how I can help people, but I like to get them so that they're taking the lead and I'm in a supportive role, as opposed to I am more the person in power telling them how things will work. So it's about developing a sense of working together, helping me to understand how I can best support them. You do need to, I think, assess for risks always. I think we all have that responsibility if we identify the potential that someone has some kind of mental illness. The two keys there for me are hearing voices. So people who may be actively hearing voices, it's important to determine if those voices are telling them to do something, because that we call command hallucinations. And most often people will enact command hallucinations. They don't have the ability to resist the voice. So I do often ask people directly if they are hearing voices, and are the voices telling them to do something, and if so, can they share with me what the voices are saying? And also in terms of suicidal behavior, if I have any sense that someone may have suicidal ideation, I ask it directly to assess for the risk factors, because often people will be communicating overtly or covertly suicidal ideations, and if we don't ask, then their interpretation can be, well, I guess people don't really care because nobody's really asked me how I'm feeling or doing, so I guess I should just follow through with my suicidal thoughts. So listening, of course, non-judgmentally, suspending any judgments that you may have, being aware of your own nonverbal, because some of us may, smile more, smile less, and I think it's important that we create an open sense with our nonverbal. I always try to stay very calm, very quiet. If somebody's getting very agitated or excited and their voice is getting raised, I often lower my voice to convey a sense of, things are going to be okay. It helps the person feel that someone's in control. I try to keep things slow and simple and short, so that you don't go on at a time when maybe a person can't really process. Open-ended questions, so I think we all know that. It encourages people, to talk more so we can better understand. Of course, sometimes you may ask a direct question to which you want a direct answer, and that's good. But otherwise, I try to leave things very open. Tell me more, can you share with me? So just sort of broad lead-ins. Important to give someone time to respond. Individuals who are challenged with mental illness and have other things going on may have a hard time hearing what you're saying, processing that, thinking about how they want to respond, and then responding. So I think it's important we give people time. And if I see someone struggling, sometimes I'll say, I can see you're giving some thought to your answer, and take your time. It's okay. I can wait. I really want to hear what you have to say. And then the person doesn't become really anxious, thinking they're asking me a question, I don't know the answer, oh my goodness, and they just get more and more agitated. Always explaining your actions, responsibilities, in the classroom, to individual students, collectively to your class, so that people are totally aware and we're transparent. There's your honesty and never lie. I just think it's incredibly important that we stay honest and truthful with our students, even if sometimes what we have to say they may not be really wanting to hear. We need to help them process the information, see it in a positive light, what they learn from this, and as I said, move on. So again, we should be listening more than we talk. And there's the strengths, right? Focusing on people's strengths, and that's often hard for people to see because they don't tend to see themselves. People with a mental illness usually have incredibly low self-esteem, and they're generally fairly bright individuals, and yet they don't see their strengths and positives, and we need to help them see that. Talk about their goals. Goals are wonderful, and no matter what they say, people manage to do amazing things, and we need to help them then break down their goals into doable steps, but encourage people to have lofty goals, because that's the hope that drives us in life. Right? It's a sense of hope, and you believe in the person's abilities to do what they're hoping to do, and it's just the route that they're going to take and the time that may be invested in that, but never that they're not capable. And offering choices and empowering the person. So in the classroom, wherever we can, what type of learners do we have? What choice can we offer in terms of mechanisms for learning, empowering the person? There's a lot of different ways people learn, and I think we have to recognize that and try to adjust our style as best we can to how individuals learn. Sometimes I think we're too prescriptive in how we look at people and how we evaluate, and there's lots of different ways people can show us the knowledge that they have. So delusions, hallucinations, I've just briefly touched. I think it's really important, if you ever are in contact with someone who talks about or has had delusions, to understand, as I said, it's false and fixed and can't be reasoned away. Therefore, our response often is to acknowledge the person believes this, but to say we don't share the belief. So that's it, that you acknowledge that this belief is very real to them, but that we don't share it. The importance of acknowledging that it's real is otherwise they hear us. If we say, well, no, you really can't be so-and-so because, and we give a logical explanation, because it's fixed, they can't process that. They're going to stick to their belief. And what they hear you saying is that you're a liar, that you believe they're not telling the truth. And they are telling the truth. That is firmly how they believe. The belief is just not based in reality. So we say, I understand that you believe, I don't share that belief. I'd like to help you. And the same with hallucinations. So people express hearing a voice, or you can say, it must be really scary to hear a voice in your head, if that's the kind of what they're communicating, or to hear that voice, I don't hear that voice. So again, you represent reality, but you convey the message that you know they are actually hearing it, because they are. People who hear voices, the voices are very real, very strong, and they cannot resist them. They're often important people in their lives, and so they do seem very, very real to the individual. So additional strategies, I don't know if people are familiar with mindfulness, but there's a lot out there. The brain research is very, very strong. So it's really helping people become present in the moment instead of living in the future and the past. Most of us are on autopilot, and our minds are always thinking about what next, an hour from now, this afternoon, this evening, or we're regretting thinking about what happened last week or yesterday. So helping people come focused to the present moment is really, the brain research will show, quite strong. So I begin my class with a 2 to 3 minute mindfulness activity, which really most times engages the students to sit still, upright in their chairs, and to drop into their breathing. So we spend a couple of minutes. They can close their eyes or not. I can send people, anybody who's interested, I can send you lots of resources. But they just bring their focus to their breathing in and out. And when their mind wanders, they just bring it back to their breath. And yes, your mind will wander several times, but you just keep, as I said, coming back to anchoring on your breath. It has shown research-wise students are more focused in the classroom in doing that. They pay greater attention. There's lots of really good research around that. And I think mindful breaks, things become stressful for students. I encourage students to push back, take time, just drop into their breathing. Physiologically, breathing in and breathing out for a few minutes helps us calm. So I encourage those. And there's lots of research that is going on. I'm happy to share with anybody. If people are interested, they can communicate with me. Avoid comparing students' academics, behaviors, and encouraging students not to compare themselves to other people. People learn at different paces, and everybody can get where they're wanting to go. It just might not be the same pathway as your peer in your classroom, but that doesn't matter. Of course, I'm sure you all know we start with easy and we build, right? We want to build on people's successes. So if somebody has a challenge with something, it's really important to look at how can we help that person gain some successes so that we build their confidence, we build their resilience, and then they can tackle more complicated tasks.
Wendy, there's an important comment here from Miranda, who's noted that she's had 2 students who were diagnosed with schizophrenia, and their writing was confused and rambling, but they couldn't see that, and Miranda has found it difficult to know how to respond, since focusing on academic writing issues aren't an option because of the state of their thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's, Miranda, that's a challenge when people can't see it. And so I don't know the cuteness of their illness at the time, but it might very well be that they're not in touch with reality. So it would be hard for them to see that. So then I would be looking at trying to have them not doing something like writing and looking to see if there is some other activity, some other thing that you can engage them with that doesn't require that to occur, because it sounds that these 2 students aren't at that point where they maybe can translate their thoughts clearly in writing. I don't know how their verbal communication is, if they could talk to you more clearly, but I would try to then not be focused on that at that time and see if you could do something different. Breaking tasks down, right, assignments into smaller sections, components. So again, we all know, I think as educators, some of those strategies. So if someone has some particular difficulty, can we, for them, break that down into more doable? Can they do an outline of an activity or an assignment, and we give them feedback? Just looking at how we can break it down so that they can be successful. And again, we can talk to them about, see how in the end you can do. You just have to give yourself the opportunity, and you have to believe in yourself. Lots of positive feedback, right? So genuine positive feedback for people's efforts, for people's trials, for seeing mistakes as a way of learning. Right? Positive journaling, I often find that can sometimes help. It can help any one of us, but it can be particularly helpful for someone who's really caught up in worries. Something negative happens, they get into a worry cycle and a spin. So I sometimes encourage people to write down, because sometimes they might not be able to verbalize it, but they'll write it, what happened, and then I encourage them to think of what else happened that day that was positive. So what you do is help to balance, because people can get caught up in the negatives that go on in a day, and they forget about all the positives, and there's lots of them. And when you encourage people to stop and think about some of the positive, nice things, the weather, what they saw, people then can see, wow, the day wasn't as bad as I thought. And I think we have to help people see that. And reminding students that mental health is a continuum, right? That they're not always going to be stuck where they think they are, and that we all move back and forth along the continuum. Some days may be good days, some days may not be good, but we can get through them. So I think that is another thing. And decatastrophizing. I talk about talking to people. All of us should realize thoughts are only mental events. And when you practice mindfulness, you learn that more and more. Our thoughts are not reality. We believe all our thoughts, but they're generally not always reality. They're just mental events. And sometimes we have to be able to see, oh, there's that negative Wendy again, or there's that worry Wendy, and all of these thought processes. I know that's not the reality. And then you can move on and not get caught up in them.
Wendy, there's an excellent suggestion from Tiffany and Miranda have been discussing gratitude journals,
Yes.
and Matthew has posted that sometimes learners are delusional about their progress, which may be slow, and or their educational goals, which may be unattainable or take a very long time to achieve. It can be difficult to be realistic with some of these students without hurting their feelings. Any suggestions?
Right. I think the gratitude journals are wonderful. I think a lot of us should practice the gratitude journals because some of us can get caught up in the negativities of our jobs, our days that go on. And we should often, most of us go home at night and take a few minutes to think about what are we really thankful for in our lives, because too often we forget some of those. So I think that's great. And it certainly is a part of mindfulness. And Matthew, I think, again, breaking down, I always want people to keep with their goals, and some of their goals seem at the moment unattainable. And I say to them, okay, you've got that goal. That sounds like a wonderful goal to have at the moment. Let's look at where you need to be 6 months from now, a year from now, and you start backtracking of all the things they need to do to get to that goal. So they want to get a PhD in chemistry. Wonderful. We need PhDs in chemistry, and people can contribute. So where do you need to be? Well, you need to, eventually get into a program. You need a master's, and you just keep backtracking to say, so we sort of laid out that plan. Let's focus on what you can do today and move forward, and then somewhere along the line they may come to their own realization that, you know what, it's not really a PhD in chemistry that they really want. They just want to know that they're being successful and moving forward. So there's your barriers, right? We all know them. Sometimes we can get caught up in talking too much. I feel like that today with this webinar. Anyway, talking too much, interrupting someone. So sometimes, and we are all vulnerable to this in all of our communication. You ever been in a room with people where we're not listening to the person, we're waiting to talk? So we often may interrupt, jump in. We're thinking about our response as opposed to listening attentively to the person. Sometimes we can get uncomfortable with subjects, and I'll see people want to change the subject. And in those cases, I often just say to people, wow, you've mentioned something that I really don't know what to say at the moment. So I'd like to give that some thought, and I'd like to get back to you because I really want to be thoughtful in my response. Rather than trying to steer off that topic or just blurting out some explanation, because sometimes we can feel, well, we're the experts, so we should just say something. I'm quite comfortable with saying to people, wow, I don't know what to say at the moment, but I'm going to give it some thought and I'll get back to you. Then they see us as real, as transparent, as honest, and someone that, yeah, we don't have all the answers in the moment. Right? And then the talking over the person, I'm sure you've seen that, where we can talk as if the person isn't there. And I always just encourage people to be aware of that. Leading questions, right, biased questions, where we're thinking that there's a certain answer and we lead that as opposed to being open. There's your why. People can become quite defensive. And of course, we all just have to watch our professional jargon. I think that goes without saying. Minimizing a person's feelings. So we don't do this maliciously, but sometimes I find people try to cheer people up or students up by saying, well, tomorrow will be better, next assignment, I'm sure you'll do great. And what it does is kind of, the person hears us minimizing how they feel at the moment. So again, lead with your E, and then you can speak after that. So I will often say, I can see how incredibly frustrated you are, or incredibly upset you are in how this worked out. Let's look at what you can take away from this, and then what you can use of this for the next assignment, the next task, to gain the mark that you're really looking for, or to succeed in the way that's really important to you. So again, for the feeling, then rather than saying, oh, I'm sure you'll do better on the next assignment, because then we're not really listening to their feelings. false reassurance. I don't ever tell people, oh, everything will be okay, tomorrow the sun's going to rise, because I don't know that for sure. What I can tell people is I'm going to be there to support them, that I believe in their ability to be successful, that I want them to be successful, and I want to contribute in every way I can to help them do that. And there's that, trying to cheer people up. When we do that, we're really just trying to cheer ourselves up, because most of us, I think in your field, the field I'm in, we want to help people. And so we have this tendency to not want to see people anxious, frustrated, upset, sad, and yet these are all human emotions. And so we need to let people feel how they feel, but encourage them not to get caught up in them ongoing. But recognize, this is a sad day for me. That's okay. We all feel sad, and we just, tomorrow will be another day, and we'll move on. So giving advice, I try never to give people advice, although they will often ask me, oh, but you're the expert, you know. And I'll say, no, you're the expert of you, and I can give you some ideas, but I'd like to hear what you think first. And I encourage people to do some thinking. That's that building resilience. That's helping people see, you know what, you really do have some ability to problem solve for yourself. And then if they say, but I'm still interested, Wendy, in what you think, I'll say, well, I'll toss out some ideas. You could think about this, you might want to think about that, and then again, here's another one that you might consider, so that I'm not telling them, that they're seeing their ability to decide for themselves. So again, approving, disapproving, well, someone might decide to do certain things that don't work out. And I'll say, so that didn't work for you, what do you think, and what might you try another time? You know, sometimes consequences, in a way, we subtly kind of indicate there's consequences for things. And while I believe in accountability, I think we have to be really careful of how we position this in terms of working with individuals. And the defensiveness. You're probably really great at not internalizing that, but I know where I work, sometimes people can be incredibly defensive to students' criticisms or things in the healthcare field when people say, oh, that, you know, doctor is terrible. People come out saying, oh, you know, he's a very good doctor and I've heard wonderful things. That's not the point. When the person is criticizing or venting, I think we can just hear it and say, wow, okay, I can see that you really don't believe that person did what they needed to do to be helpful. So I'd like to hear what you think could be different the next time. How can I do it differently that you would see it as more helpful and not taking it personally? So here's the self-harm. You'll see it. So I think the point, I'm just cognizant of the time here. And so for me, the purpose of self-harm, these are times it happens. It is an intent to cope with life. It is not an intent to harm yourself. So maybe we can just click through some of these slides, Sarah, relatively quickly. People can see them. So people often feel numb. They're trying to gain control. As I said, they're trying to cope with life, reduce their anxiety. Maybe they're depressed and they're trying to escape that, relieve their pain. So it's trying to cope with some of the different feelings that people have. And so I think we just missed one, but you can see there, you know, other ways people might be trying to feel their emotions more intently. People who are attempting suicide are intent on ending their life. People who self-harm are trying to cope with their life. I think that's the important point. It can be addictive, so that's why you see people repeat this. And to understand that there is a physiological, as people self-harm, so maybe they cut themselves with a razor blade, endorphins are released, which gives us a short sense of a high. So they get some relief. It's very temporary. And then the challenges start again. So then they ultimately self-harm again. And there, people are often hide this. Some people may not. Some people may share it with you. And I don't see this as some people see it as manipulative. I think it's important to say, imagine how we'd have to feel to self-harm ourselves in order to get someone's attention. So it is something that can definitely be managed, and over time people lengthen the time between the self-harm and the repeating self-harm. They'll put a plan in place with some help. They might go out to a public place. They might jump in the shower. They may do something when the urge comes to self-harm so that they don't. And as I said, then it gradually lengthens the time between them and they develop other coping mechanisms. I will be sending out this PowerPoint, so I'll just reiterate that again. People can communicate with me, if we miss some things. So there's the strategies related to self-harm. And as I said, it can be dealt with. We need to be empathic. We need to see it not as something manipulative, but somebody's trying to cope with the challenges they have.
There's a great comment from Sarah Gill that Sarah really likes the idea of getting away from asking why. I feel like I use that a lot and need to reframe it. Can you repeat the language you use instead of using why?
Yes.
I do try to put the emotions first, but really like how you framed that. Now, I'd just like to remind Wendy and our participants we are cognizant of the time, but
Right.
Those of you who can stay, and Wendy, if you're willing to continue to talk, nobody's going to
Sure.
get cut off, and I'll remind you that you all have access to the recording after. So go ahead,
Right.
Wendy. Thank you.
Okay. So I often say, help me understand. So help me understand what was leading up to your intense feeling of frustration. So that open-ended and leading with my E, it must be really difficult. I can see how frustrated you're feeling. That's really tough. Help me understand what led up to this and how I can be helpful. So you lead with your E and you open it up so that they can just talk. Okay, move on. So there's the suicidal, right, some stats, and so it's a huge issue. What you see there is basically the point is that suicide is a huge issue. We need to be aware of, all of us. As a life skill, we need to be aware. Okay, Sarah, I'm just going to start clicking through my, yes. So there's some of the myths, right? People who talk about don't do it, they do talk often, we miss it. It doesn't happen without warning generally. It's just that we miss some of the warning signs, or sometimes we're too afraid to ask someone. Certainly talking about it doesn't ever give someone the idea of committing suicide, and we do have lots of young people, and we're certainly hearing in the news about people who actually are very young, 8 and 10 years of age, who have gone ahead and committed suicide. Sarah, I'm going to just click through myself, right? Okay, so people wish to die. No, generally they have an ambivalence there. They don't 100% want to die, but they don't think that there's anything that people can do to help them. So we need to try to help people see that there is hope through that, and you can get through those feelings and still go on living. Suicidal, always know it's a short-lived period of time, and that's when we want to engage with people and get people help. I think it's incredibly important to know that once no longer depressed, the danger isn't over. Some people get caught off guard with people who go through a depression, are being treated, maybe on antidepressants. They're starting to get brighter, back to their own self. They may even be discharged home, and they commit suicide 6 or 7 weeks after going home. What's happened there is that treatment, the antidepressants, have increased their mood, given them the energy, but not necessarily change the reasons they were feeling suicidal. So now they have the energy to act on their thoughts. When someone's in the depth of depression, they may think about it every day, but they don't have the psychic energy to act on the thoughts they're having. And our treatment of it gives them that energy. So we need to be checking in with people when the depression is over, how they're doing, how they're managing, because that can be an incredibly dangerous time. Suicide isn't inherited, but it does run in families. In terms, if someone in your family has committed suicide, then people in that family are more likely to think of this as a way of coping with life than someone whose family has never had a member commit suicide. So there's more risk factors, right? Old, young, definitely more males, but females can also be very intent. More males are successful at suicide because of the mechanisms they use. They tend to use far more violent means of committing suicide in comparison to women, but it doesn't mean that women are any less intent. Some stressors, so we should always be doing risk assessments with our families, our colleagues, the students we work with, anything, unemployed, series of health issues, people who are divorced, single. Many people have abuse and trauma in their life, so we need to do our own kind of risk assessments when we're engaging with people. Right, depression, people with schizophrenia, right? If you have a command hallucination telling you that you aren't worthy, that you should kill yourself, then people are likely to act on that. So we need to be checking in if someone's hallucinating, hearing voices, what are the voices telling them? Substance use, I think that's pretty common sense. It impairs your judgment. So people who are using substances may do or react in ways they wouldn't normally do. Sometimes there's some personality traits that can make people more prone. Okay, somebody who sees the cup half empty as opposed to the cup half full. And anybody who's had a previous suicidal attempt is definitely at higher risk. Often people who are successful at suicide have had a previous attempt. So we need to be very aware. Warning signs, right? Changes in behavior. People who are suddenly or unexpectedly cheerful, maybe they've now made the decision to follow through on their suicidal ideas. It's kind of like you finally feel like you're relief because you've made a decision. And we need to check in if we see that. What are people thinking? Mood swings, emotional outbursts, right? People who are very agitated, irritable. I want to check in with people. There's your depression. Certainly a lot of people who follow through with suicide have a level of depression, the cycle of helpless, hopeless, desperation. They pull back from friends because often they're maybe planning and they don't want people to identify. So I think we need to be watchful of that. Somebody who doesn't come to class, right? We really would want to be checking in. So strategies, ask directly for any of us. Doesn't matter what walk of life you're in, if it's your family, your friends, your colleagues at work, your students. You ask directly, are you thinking of killing yourself? And if someone says, whoa, what would ever make you think of that? Then you share your observations. I've noticed that, and I'm concerned and I care about you. Right? And so if then someone says, yes, I thought about it, you ask if they have a plan. And then you determine the details of the plan and then whether they have the means to carry out the plan, because each level increases the lethality for that person and the risk. So that's important to do. I think, again, empathy, lead with your E, never minimize previous attempts. It's not, somebody may have 4 or 5 times, and some people will say, well, if they really were intent, they would have done it by now. That is not true. And when we ever take that attitude, we can sometimes push someone into feeling there is absolutely no way out now but to commit suicide. So we have to be really careful and not do that. Try to look at the reasons for living. When someone's so in the depths of despair, they may not see things like they have a pet. Who's going to feed their pet when they're gone? When someone commits suicide, it's a finality that some people don't relate to in terms of all the domino effect that's going to have in their life and all the people in their life that that's going to impact. And it helps us to connect with them by sharing that. And of course, getting help immediately for people that we see at a very high risk of suicide. So police, families go in front of a JP and explain their concerns, and a justice of the peace might write an order for police to take the person to hospital if they're not willing to go. So my final thoughts, right, this is a partnership. We're all in this together. We're the face of mental illness, as well may be our students, and so we need to support each other in our journey to stay well. People aren't looking for us to fix them. People are incredibly intelligent, and particularly people who face mental health challenges. They just want to know that we see them as people, not an illness, that we truly want to partner with them. We let them lead and we support. And they want to be accepted and not judged, right? Accepted as a person and not judged in terms of what has occurred in their life. And I think we all can do that very well. So I often say people get better in spite of the system, and that's true. And I am a part of the healthcare system, and sometimes we don't do the right things by people, and they still have the resilience to get through a system that's not all that supportive. Remembering recovery is different for every person, right? It can take time. People didn't develop this instantaneously, and so recovery is going to take time, and we need to help people see that so that when they falter, when they have difficult days, that doesn't mean that they're resorting back to something serious. That just means the blip in the road. They pick themselves up, they dust themselves off, we are supportive, and they believe in themselves. So that's what we need to bring so that people can see, you know what, you're learning by every step you take. You learn something that builds your resilience for the next time. Substance use is a good example. I think it's something 6 to 8 times people fall off the wagon before they have a clear recovery. And I think that a lot of people don't know that. They see when people resort back to drinking or drugs, oh my goodness, they're not motivated, they don't want to do this. That's not true. That's a part of the process. So we have to help people see that sometimes the bad days and the challenges or the hospitalizations they may have for short periods are all part of the process and does not mean that they will not be successful in the end. So there's my final message, right? Mental illness, I believe, is a required life skill that we all need to develop, and we need to support each other. The last few slides, just resources that you may be fully aware of these. You'll see them and you want to contact me about other resources. I'm happy to help. And the last several slides, Sarah can just click through. Here's the website for an online mental health resource for lay people called Mindsight. You're all free to go on it. It's freely available. You can give it to whomever you want. And it covers off mental illnesses and what we can do to help each other and help ourselves. So Sarah will just click through so you can see some of the screen pieces of Mindsight. Here's a section talked about stigma. That's Bruce Ballin. He's a psychiatrist. He vetted all the material in Mindsight. So not only myself, I created it and put the content in, but Bruce read it all. So here's an example. The illness is described. And then it talks about signs and symptoms of that illness. Then there's a video clip of someone living with the illness. So the face of mental illness, they talk a little bit about their personal story, which is very powerful and I think people could very much relate to. Then it talks about how can we help a colleague, a friend, a family member. So very basic communication strategies that we can use. How can you help yourself? So again, some wellness strategies we can all implement. And it talks a little bit about some treatment options so people have some idea of how that illness might be treated. And then there's a section for each of the illnesses where you can get additional educational information about the illness and then some supports that are available. That last section is under each of the 9 mental illnesses that are covered, stigma, and after each section there's 5 multiple choice questions that are based on what you've gone through, what you've read, and if you choose to, you can go through, answer those, and then at the end it'll ask you if you want to apply for a certificate of completion from our university, so the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. There's an example of the certificate that will be mailed out to you. If you choose to apply for a certificate, you'll be given a place where you put in what's the name on the certificate and what's the address you want it mailed to. To date, I can tell you, I just got an update last week. We've issued over 4,200, so 4,200 certificates from 2010 when I created it. So as I said, you're welcome to use that. You're welcome to share that in your classrooms. It could be a way for students to become informed and support each other of mental illness and empower them. But certainly feel free to use the resource yourself. Give it to anybody that you would like. And I thank you for the time. And I'm sorry I did run over. But as I said, there's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me at any time, and I'll definitely get back to you.
Wendy, if you have a time, I see Dave has his hand up. Let me give you the
Sure.
microphone, Dave.
Sure.
If you click on the microphone icon to the left of your name now, Dave, we should be able to hear you speak. Go ahead, Dave, if you would like to. I can watch for text chat as well, Dave, because we're not hearing you.
I do see Sarah, some people asking about MindSite, and you're right, it may come up as mymindsight.uoit.ca. I'm not really sure how that sort of migrated into that, but you should definitely be able to get into it once you go in and you log on. So it'll ask you for a like your name, your login name that you want to use, and a password. Keep that information, and then you can go in and out of MindSite as many times as you want. So it's not a resource you have to complete all at once. You can access it in and out using your username and password that you determine.
Thanks, Wendy, and thank you, Dave, for assuring us that you didn't have another question. It's been a fantastic presentation. I think I speak for everyone here in thanking you, Wendy, for such a fulsome presentation and for responding to the questions and comments and for being generous in sharing this information both here and allowing us to circulate it later today, as I promise I will. We'd really appreciate it if you'd complete the evaluation once you receive the link that I will send in the message with the presentation. And on behalf of the online community of practice for literacy and basic skills, Wendy, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and caring so much about helping us educate ourselves better as to how to support our learners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And as I said to anybody out there, please feel free to contact me. I'm pretty good on email. And then we can also arrange to talk on the phone. If I don't have answers to some of your questions, I'm happy to talk to the colleagues that I know and get back to you. So I believe we're all in this together, and I'm happy to help. So you know where to find me.
All right, well, that does it for this presentation this morning. We look forward to inviting everyone to join us. Our next online community of practice webinar isn't until February, being mindful of everyone's busy lives over the upcoming holiday season. So we want to wish you all the best. Stay safe and well, and continue your great work, everyone. And we look forward to staying in touch. Thanks again, and have a great day.